an exhibition that I co-curated with my colleagues Elizabeth Knott and Claire Fitzgerald. It was an exhibition entitled A Wonder to Behold, Craftsmanship and the Creation of Babylon's Ishtar Gate. And unfortunately, that symposium got canceled, like so many things, due to the pandemic. So the questions that the present symposium seeks to address emerged from my experience working on the ISAW exhibition. Namely, how do we as scholars, archaeologists, educators, and museum professionals imagine and reconstruct ancient monuments and spaces? And how can we be more self-aware about our methods? For example, how have shifting technologies of reconstruction colored our views of the past? And at a foundational level, what is it that we are trying to convey through reconstructions? And what might we be conveying unintentionally? How can we make sure that our reconstructions incorporate multiple voices and are accessible to a broad public in a way that is both historically accurate and visually and sensorially effective and engaging, and at the same time doesn't reiterate colonial narratives? What is the ideal relationship between in situ, museum, and virtual reconstructions? And how can these different modes of reconstruction most effectively work together to redress cultural heritage issues? How can we use reconstructions to share authority with local and descendant Middle Eastern communities and the international community of scholars, as well as earlier excavators who in many cases had the privilege of experiencing firsthand certain aspects of ancient monuments and spaces that may no longer be available today? So those are some of the questions that I hope we can discuss today. I would like to take this opportunity also to extend my gratitude to my colleagues, Elizabeth Knott, Alex Nagel, and Zaid Al-Rawi, who have at various stages helped to shape the direction of today's symposium. And thank you also to Megan Lewis for so generously offering to broadcast today's event on Digital Hammurabi's YouTube channel. So we are also live on YouTube right now. You will see that today's program is organized by pairs of talks on a related topic or methodology, which will hopefully lead to fruitful discussion following each pair of presentations. And I do hope that we will have dialogue with those of you in the audience. So to that end, please use the chat feature to ask questions, make comments, or to alert me that you wish to speak. And I will then ask you to unmute and ask your question. I'm afraid that with so many of you in the audience, I won't be able to track the raise hand feature. So please do use the comments instead, use the chat feature instead. And as a reminder, please do remain muted during the presentations. Thank you. So without further ado, let us proceed to the first section of today's program, which looks at 19th and early 20th century archaeological reconstruction drawings. Our first speaker is Sebastian Hagenoyer, who holds a master's degree from Freie Universität in Berlin, where he's also currently completing his doctoral degree in the archaeology of West Asia. He's also a research assistant and lecturer at the Universität zu Köln in digital and computational archaeology, and he's the founder of Artifacts, a company that specializes in creating visual reconstructions of ancient architecture. And today he will be sharing his dissertation research with a talk entitled Reconstructing Ancient West Asia, Appropriation, Politics, and Early Reconstruction Drawings. Go ahead, you should be able to share your screen.
I'll try. Can you see it?
Yes, wonderful.
Okay. So let me begin by thanking the organizers for inviting me to talk here today on this workshop. I'm very happy to be part of a group that is meeting and discussing about reconstructing the past, as I am most dedicated to that special topic. I also want to apologize in advance for my probably very German English. I promise I'll do my very best. What I will present here today is part of my ongoing, but thankfully soon to be over PhD that I'm currently writing at the Freie Universität Berlin. In my dissertation, I do not only have a look at past reconstructions like I will do today, but also at modern 3D visualizations, as well as the influence of these images to the general public in the past and the present. Nevertheless, I'm looking forward to discussing with you this small sample of my work and, if you will, already test out my own ideas on you during this one-day workshop. Visual representations or reconstructions of the past are as old as archaeology itself. If we focus our view on ancient West Asia, the earliest excavations in this region were carried out by Paul-Émile Botta in Nimrud and later Khorsabad, Sir Austen Henry Layard in Nimrud and Nineveh, and Victor Plas also in Khorsabad as the successor of Botta. Although Botta's draftsman Eugène Flandin did create wonderful two-dimensional reconstructions of the palace facades, I want to focus my presentation today on Sir Austen Henry Layard and Victor Plas as the first two archaeologists that published perspective reconstructions of their respective excavated palaces in ancient West Asia. Layard's famous image, The Palaces of Nimrud Restored of 1853, seen on the left, was drawn by Thomas M. Baines after the excavation results of Layard and the architectural ideas of James Ferguson, an architect and close friend of Layard. Victor Plas published his reconstruction Vue Cavalière du Palais Restauré in 1867, seen on the right, so 14 years later. The image was drawn by a Monsieur Petit way after the excavation. What I do not want to do today is to discuss the inaccuracies of these reconstructions. It is in fact very easy to criticize old reconstructions due to their lack of excavation data and contemporary analogies. What I would rather like to do is to discuss the political dimensions of these images. I want to take a look on how these images are a mirror of the mindset of late 19th century England and France. I also want to take a look on how different the representation of the past is to that of the present of late 19th century CE. If we first take a look at the image of Nimrud, we can see an idyllic representation of Neo-Assyrian society. In the background, we can spot a ziggurat and several monumental buildings, all of them multi-storied. The outer walls are beautifully decorated with a small range of colors, and the upper stories were column-supported clear stories with colorful curtains in between them. The foreground shows us a busy but still relaxed everyday life of ancient Nimrud, with ships sailing down the river Tigris and shepherds attending their flock. I think we can all agree that this is a very romantic view of the Nimrud palaces. For Layard, the richness in color was very important, as he actually had found traces of these colors on the reliefs, and a major goal of his work was to make the art of ancient West Asia more appealing to the museums in England, which were, compared to Greek and Roman art, not accepting Assyrian art as such. Concerning the columns, which were never found during the excavation, he argued, although no traces of columns were found in Nimrud, Ferguson insisted on representing the upper stories as open clear stories to let light and air into the palaces. Together with Ferguson, Layard also designed the Assyrian court in the Grand Exhibition in the Crystal Palace in London, where they also used columns. At his time, the general idea about Mesopotamian architecture, including columns, was an analogy to ancient Persian architecture. By these two examples alone, we can clearly see how personal ideas and agendas have formed that image. In addition, preconceptions formed by biblical paintings and Orientalism were influencing the picture language as well, as Bora and Bahrani have already shown. In stark contrast to the romanticized image of ancient Nimrud, depictions in Layard's publication about the excavation and the shipping of the Lamassu to London were using a completely different language. Here, Layard visualizes himself as the ruler and the local workers as his slaves, in a clear analogy to Sanherit's reliefs, as Simon Lindner has shown. With his positioning as the Neo-Assyrian ruler over the local workers in Nimrud, Layard's depiction of the Lamassu transport to London as a direct act of appropriation, or in other words, of taking, of ancient West Asian heritage serves as a legitimization for doing so. In addition to the physical appropriation, however, Layard also takes the intrinsic value of ancient West Asian heritage. In other words, Layard connects the ancient West Asian heritage to Europe and disconnects it from West Asia. Let's now move on to the image from the publication of Victor Plas. This image looks different. At first sight, it seems pretty neutral. The observer does not stand in front of the palaces as part of the picture, but is hovering above the scene. There are no colors, although found during excavation, as this image is a copper line engraving instead of a color lithograph. Humans are barely visible and only serve as a size comparison. The background is fading to put the architecture into the focus of the image. We can spot two domes at the entrance that seem a bit odd, as does the sloping or skewed ziggurat in the back. Instead of romanticized architecture, Plas offered a more or less neutral view on the palaces in Khorsabad. How come? When Plas started his excavation in Khorsabad, he was well financed by the French state. Layard, on the other hand, was not. He had to finance a lot by himself and had a hard time finding sponsorship for his excavation. Plas, on the other hand, stood in the tradition of elite state-financed endeavors in West Asia. Q, Napoleon's Description de l'Égypte, and for that reason did produce a very elite publication, only available to a small elite group of people. It might as well also be that this was the reason Plas used a colorless copper line engraving instead of a color lithograph, as the line engraving was more expensive and also, again, more elite. But was his reconstruction so neutral after all? Elements like the domes at the entrance resemble the West Asian architecture as Plas has experienced it himself. Even the ziggurat resembles the spiral tower of Samarra, but also the description of the Tower of Babel given by Herodotus. This way, Plas was introducing his personal experiences as well as Greek descriptions of West Asia into his reconstruction. Plas also did publish an image of his transport of ancient West Asian heritage. As it is clearly visible, it uses the same language as Layard did and does in fact resemble it in a conspicuous way. To make it absolutely clear, though, that this image is showing the French appropriation instead of the British, a flag is put on top of the wagon. Again, do Europeans connect themselves to Neo-Assyrian rulers and therefore as the owner of that heritage? Local workers are displayed as their deportees or slaves. Here we again have the connection between ancient West Asian heritage and Europe, and therefore the disconnection to contemporary West Asia. It should have become very clear by now that by analyzing these images and how they have formed in the late 19th century, we can already see that we deal with a fair amount of Eurocentrism in these reconstructions. Layard and Plas were going different ways though. While Layard popularized a colorful and romantic ancient West Asia that involved the British middle class in form of widely available publications, exhibitions, or public coverage in newspapers, Plas depicted ancient West Asia in an apparently neutral, nearly empty space only for a small group of the French elite. As the run for ancient West Asian heritage for European museums shows, but also the images of appropriation shown before, there was also a competition between British and French archaeology, fueling the acquisition of ancient West Asian artifacts. In my opinion, there are three main practices that can be seen by analyzing these and other early reconstruction drawings as an expression of Eurocentrism and Orientalism overall. First, the romanticization of the past. Second, the intrinsic appropriation of ancient heritage. And third, the cultural alienation of West Asian societies. These three main practices are also interconnected. First, by romanticizing the past, these reconstructions are differentiating the past of West Asia from contemporary West Asia that was depicted in a very different way. Besides the analogies to Sanherib already shown, 19th century West Asia was described as dirty and desolate. In the minds of late 19th century Europeans who saw themselves as the pinnacle of cultural evolution, the contemporary West Asia was in need of help and correction, as many documents of that time show. By depicting the past of West Asia as a former cultural high, in contrast to the contemporary West Asians as now perished civilization in need of help, these images foster a strong Darwinian view on West Asia. Second, intrinsic appropriation, on the other hand, takes place when the ancient past of West Asia gets assimilated into European culture by posing as the white king over the heritage of West Asia and other visual cues in these images. This, however, also leads to the legitimization of physical appropriation and therefore the transport of West Asian heritage to European museums. We still can observe this intrinsic appropriation today with current discussions about the repatriation of stolen heritage by European museums. Third, cultural alienation finally combines the first two positions in that the contemporary West Asian culture, so by the end of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire, was culturally so alienated by its own heritage that the sovereignty over the cultural heritage was not in the hands of Constantinople, but rather London, Paris, and later Berlin. Today, we very slowly see a shift back into the right direction as Iraqi, Syrian, Iranian, and other West Asian archaeologists claim their right of excavating their own past instead of us. These 3 points of Eurocentrism in early archaeological reconstruction are not the only practices observable, but due to my research, the most obvious and transferable ones. Transferable in this sense means that these practices get adapted or rather accepted by the public of the late 19th century. But as I will show in my dissertation, also even today. I sincerely hope that I was able to convey my point on early reconstructions. As interesting and beautiful as they are, they need to be seen in the light of Eurocentrism, Orientalism, and imperial archaeology. I thank you very much for your attention.
We need to move on to let us now move on to the fourth and last section of today's symposium, Reconstructing Monuments and Architecture in Virtual Space. Our first speaker is Mustafa Faraj, who received his BA from the University of Mosul in 2011, where he is currently completing his master's degree, supervised by Dr. Yasmin Abdul Karim Muhammad Ali. He has participated in the excavations of the University of Mosul at Kayunjik Mound of Nineveh from 2011 to 12, the Mosul Museum Restoration Project from 2012 to 14, and the Nimrud Rescue Project in 2018. He has also been working in the documentation and photograph department of the Mosul Museum since 2012. And today he will be sharing his research from his thesis with a talk entitled 3D Model of the Banquet Stela or Yellow Stela from the period of Ashurnasirpal II.
Hello everyone, I am glad and honored to meet you and share with you summary of my MA project. But before starting, I wish that you excuse me for my little bit bad English. Can you hear me?
Your PowerPoint full screen because we're seeing the slides on the side as well.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Wonderful, thank you.
To begin with, I would like to present a brief historical account of the Mosul Museum. In 1950, the Directorate of General Antiquities in Iraq acquired the building of the municipal lobby in the city of Mosul. Oh, sorry. in the city of Mosul, which was built prior the Second World War. In fact, the directorate's staff prepared this building to be the first museum in the city. On March 20, 1952, the museum was inaugurated to be the second oldest and largest museum in Iraq, after the Iraqi National Museum in Baghdad. At its inception, the museum consists of the one hall that contained antiquities from the cities of Hatra and Nimrud. A second hall was added, in which models of antiquities were displayed, representing the different stages of Iraqi civilization, extended from prehistoric times to Islamic era. Later, with the increased artifacts in the museum, thinking began to establish a new building. Work on construction started with an area of 1,700 square meters, as it's opened in 1972. The museum consists of 3 floors, which are as follows. 1, the basement, which include the employees' offices, the library, the laboratory, and the meeting room. The first floors include 3 large halls: the Assyrian hall, which contains the antiquities of the Assyrian civilization; the hall of Hatra city, which contains the antiquities of Hatra; and the Islamic hall, which contains the monuments from different Islamic eras. The second floors, it includes the 4th hall, which contains antiquities from prehistoric era. After 2003, the museum became neglected due to the difficult condition that accompanied the American occupation and bad security situation in Nineveh. In 2012, work began on comprehensive rehabilitation and restoration the project of a museum, as the goal was develop gallery, a laboratory, a documentation and photography department, and a library. In addition to establishing a store of antiquities, the research was one of the project contributors. However, work on this project stopped in June 2014 after Mosul fall to ISIS. On February 2015, ISIS published video showing the destruction of the museum. The Yellow Stela, the discovery and destruction. In the spring of 1951, the British excavation expedition in Nimrud, headed by Max Malawan, discovered a stela belonging to King Ashur Nasrbal II at Ea Room, nearby Throne Room B in Northwest Palace. The stela, which is a block of yellow sandstone with weight of more than 750 kilograms, having rectangular shape with height of 128 centimeter, a width of 104.5 centimeter, and thickness of 57 centimeter. The stela front include artistic scene in which King Ashur Nasrbal II is shown standing, holding a scepter in one hand and a long stick in the second hand. On top of the scene, showing 6 of the ancient Iraqi gods. The crescent, which is the symbol of the moon god. The winged disc, which is the symbol of the god Ashur, patron god of the Assyrians. The star, which is the symbol of the goddess Ishtar. The head or crown, which is the symbol of the god Anu. Lightning, which is the symbol of the god Strom's added. The 7 points, which is the symbol of the Sibiti. The stela front, back, and left side contain 154 lines of cuneiform writing that documents the king titles, his military campaign, the renovation of the city of Nimrud, the construction of the palace, the construction of the water canal and garden, the building of temple, and the hunting of animal, and more. In addition to referring to the opening of the palace and the 10-day feast attended by more than 69,000 people, where they could have many kinds of foods, meats, drinks, fruit, vegetable, and spices. Later, the stela has been moved to the Muslim Museum and become is one of the most important artifacts in Muslim Museum because it is unique shape, its rare color, and the text on it is of exceptional importance, as it is the only Assyrian text that contain all of aforementioned information. Following ISIS occupation of Mosul, the militants destroyed the Muslim Museum and its archaeological holdings include the stela, which was severely destroyed using a hand hammer or an electric drill. They dropped it on its front. The hundreds of the fragments were scattered. After liberation, of Mosul from ISIS, the museum reconstruction project began in 2019, including the restoration of the stela, but work suspended due to the corona pandemic. Creating the 3D model. One of the modern documentation methods for artifacts is the creation of the 3D models. 3D models are usually created using several methods, the most important of which is photogrammetry of artifacts. However, it is not possible to make a scan of the yellow stela because it is so destructive. In order to solve this problem, we have relied on old picture and the drawings. The most important which three picture taken by Qais Rashid dating back to 2008, the reproduction of the cuneiform text inscribed on the stela, which was conducted by the researcher Wiseman in 1951. In addition to the measurement of the main stela, we measured the scene shown on the front face of the stela, which reached height of 47.5 centimeter and width of 37 centimeter, with a gap in the top with height of 2.5 centimeter. As for the height of the lines, as for the height of the lines, they range between 2.2 and 2.4 centimeter. We're collecting this data, and next step was to create the model using AutoCAD program and other assistive program. The Architectural House Office in Mosul undertook this task as architect Sarah Raad Al-Hayali working on creating this model in the period from 23 March to 27 April. The work steps were as follows. 1. Creating two-dimensional drawing of the stela face using AutoCAD program. Create a two-dimensional drawing of the artistic scene on the stela face, creating a two-dimensional drawing of the cuneiform signs, forming this model, forming the model and converting the two-dimensional drawing into three-dimensional. Extract color samples by the Adobe Photoshop program, adding material, making lighting and color processing using Autodesk 3ds Max program, taking multiple shots of stela. Objective of creating the 3D model. One of the most important objectives of establishing this model is attempt to document the celebrated yellow stela. The form can also be printed using a 3D printer, so it can display to students and researchers. This in addition to the ability to display it on Google Art and Culture website and making them available over the internet so that can anyone easily access them. Finally, this model is expected the most important means of assistance in the process of restoring the stela, as this process is very complex and accurate due to the containment of stela surface on cuneiform writing, taking into consideration that its parts were scattered into hundreds of pieces. The facility this task, this model can be used in the restoration process, returning the fragment to its correct position and avoiding error during installation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mustafa, for bringing attention to the state of this monument and the restoration process. We'll now move on to the last talk before taking questions. So last but not least is Dr. Rojan Kamal Mohammed Amin, who received her bachelor's degree in architectural engineering from the University of Soleimani in Iraq, and her master's and doctoral degrees in environmental design from the University of Calgary in Canada. She is the founding director of the Digital Cultural Heritage Research Center and co-director of the Cultural Heritage Network at Soleimani Polytechnic University, where she also teaches and supervises undergraduate and graduate students in the City Planning Engineering Department. Additionally, she is secretary of Rashid International, co-director of the Nahrain Network, and an honorary research fellow at University College London. Her talk today is entitled The New Realities of Architectural Reconstructions and Experiences.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Anastasia, and thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So in my talk, I will be focusing on the rising role of augmented reality and virtual reality as what the so-called new realities technology in architectural and historic reconstruction, and in particularly experiencing them. So just to start off, with this discussion, do you see my screen? Okay, here.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So just to start off with just a brief, recap of what past reconstruction and historic reconstruction is about. So just like from the previous discussion, as you might have noticed, so aside from documentation and research, past reconstruction is actually serving also a bigger purposes in that it is actually stimulating imaginations and deepening engagement with historic space, people, and events. In that regard, it's kind of perceived as a kind of an effective tool for that kind of stimulating imagination, and as an effective medium for communicating about history and also synthesizing historic data and information. So, and then when we are talking about communication and technology, then the very interesting phrase the sentence by Marshall McLuhan, "The medium is the message," kind of comes into my mind when it says it's actually sometimes not just what you create, it's also how you present it, and the tools that you are using is also become the message in itself. And so relating that to digital reconstruction of historic sites and spaces, kind of just if you think about it, if you kind of, let's say that you are going through digital reconstruction and now you need to display, to communicate that to researchers and also visitors or viewers. So if you display that in a 2D, in a 2D way, or in a portable or even fixed screens, how would that affect the experience and interaction with it versus if you are when your interaction with those objects or 3D reconstruction are actually through your computer mouse or your touch screen, versus if you are doing it in an augmented reality way, kind of using augmented reality, which can kind of take a new way, making it more interactive in a sense that you can actually take those objects or those historic reconstruction out of virtual world and bringing them onto your hands, such as you can see in this case, or even contextualizing it by having it tagging it, geotagging it into the actual context in real time and in life size. Or even in the case of virtual reality, where you are actually immersing people inside those reconstruction and engaging all this feeling. So in that regard, when we are talking about the use of AR and VR in historic reconstruction, it's not just about how we experience and interact with historic reconstruction, but also what and how we reconstruct them in the first place. So just briefly, for those of you who are not familiar with the technologies, virtual technology, it's actually about full immersion, it's fully immerses viewers in a stimulated 3D environment through specialized glasses, those called VR glasses. But unlike VR, like virtual reality, augmented reality actually does a different things. So instead of actually immersing a user in a computer environment or simulated environment, it actually brings out computer world and overlay it or tag it or augment it into the real view, the actual world and the view of a user. So in that regard, that's why it's considered as a form of mixed reality. But all of these kind of technology are now there are new terminologies and debates about whether this is extended reality or extended reality in itself is also a new technology. But there are generally those discussion about these forms of technologies are actually extending the realities of our world, of our physical world. Given the time limit, I won't be able to go into detail of the project, but in the next slides, I will briefly highlight some projects for reconstruction and experiencing distant and more recent, actually, past in Western Asia. So in the rebirth of the Buddha of Bamiyan, using projection-based augmented reality, it was possible to actually bring back the life-size scale of the destructed statue of Buddha. You might remember back in 2000, the world was shocked with footage of Taliban destructing this World Heritage Site. But then with projection-based augmented reality, a team, I think it was funded by a couple from China who wanted to bring back the statue to life, and using augmented reality actually made it possible to even contextualize it. So in that regard, geolocating that virtual statue in its actual location, not just seeing it in a computer world or in a simulated environment. So again, this is one of the things that AR can do when it comes to historic reconstruction. And not only that, just reconstructing the actual one, but also adding color and also sound to it, basically even animating it. In Arbella Layers Uncovered, which is a proof of concept from my master's, based on the ancient site of Erbil Citadel from in Kurdistan region of Iraq from 6,000 years ago. It's considered like a world is continuously inhabited city, that's how they are perceiving it. So you see that by using mobile augmented reality, it was possible to actually not only 3D reconstruct the damaged part, but also align it with the live view of the existing component or the existing structures that are remaining on the site. So basically, as you can see in the first screen, so if you're on the site and you hold your mobile, but then there are these the indicators are popping up, telling you basically there are something to augment there. And then when you tap on them, then these 3D model reconstruction are actually appearing on the site, making it giving it the context, the actual context, making use of the actual context of Erbil Citadel instead of actually putting it in a whole computer environment. And then another thing actually that's possible with mobile augmented reality is actually kind of a different way of reconstruction is actually through using archival photo instead of just using 3D modeling, actually using archival photos from different components and different structures in the citadel and geotagging it. So basically, if you are if you are within a certain distance, of course, with GPS error, there is a certain error within that. But within that error, you can actually hold your phone, and then actually, if you remove your phone, you are actually seeing the actual gate. But if you bring it back, then you are seeing the archival photo geotagged on the existing gate, kind of giving it a context and making it like a time machine where you are actually able to see the past and present now. And then in the talk to Sarai, which is kind of a mobile AR project that we are now actually redeveloping as part one of our work of our center. It's kind of, again, we are using mobile augmented reality to reconstruct the history and the events of the iconic Sarai building, which is kind of considered one of the most iconic building in the modern city of Suleimani. So here you see by using a different approach of reconstruction, the technology enables us actually to reconstruct it through like cognitive reconstruction, through the oral history and recounts of eyewitnesses from like historical characters from that era. It's kind of making it actually possible to bring those characters back to life and have them talk about the different events and different history of that particular building. So the way it works, if you hold your mobile against any of those characters that I just showed, which are like, all these are archival photos, they are not staged photos. So this is like, this is one of the female leaders from the colonial era, where she talks about how she started the first school, and then giving you also some recounts that relate to some of the events that was happening in or around Sarai building, kind of creating that mental image about the like history and reconstruction, regardless of just visualizing it in image, but also through words, using that through words. And so then she starts talking to you as of like in first person interpretation, and we are using historical empathy to actually emphasize that engagement. And then in the reconstruction of Pasha Kora Castle, which is kind of a project by a group of my students, they are like, this is for a remote. They are looking into actually how to transfer this, not only reconstruct it for the sake of documentation, but also create a e-tourism, electronic tourism experience based on this remote and endangered actually site, just because of like negligence as well as because of its location, which is not accessible. So with AR and VR, it's possible to actually not just see those experiences, like see the castle, like anywhere, basically like on your desk, for example, at home, or even getting inside it, such as in a case of a virtual reality where we are creating a stimulated environment, where you can actually go inside it and see it for yourself, even if you are not in Dukan or if you are outside even the country. But then we are also now, again, taking that approach of reconstruction as if you can actually use text and words and stories for actually reconstructing history. We are actually adding in the next phase, actually, we are adding kind of human guides as a, human guide into that, and even experts, who have been videotaped in front of chroma key, like green screens, and then adding them to that virtual environment now, who can talk about, instead of actually rebuilding the building, because when it comes to historic reconstruction, sometimes there are debates. Oh, this wall was like this, not like that. Experts are debating. Now you can, instead of actually visualizing it, actually having the experts having those debates and discussion there, or even having human guide take you through different parts of it. And then in Nobody's Listening VR experience, which is kind of a project from Yazda and Surround Vision that we are actually helping with assessing it. It's about more recent history of Iraq, but then using virtual reality kind of technology, it's actually enabling viewers to actually get into the sight and sound and stories of the tragedies experience and the genocide experienced by the Yazidis, and through it you can visualize it anywhere. Basically, expose users to the destruction of cultural heritage of very precious cultural heritage for Yazidis, or even immersing them in the destruction that was left, or even the event that was taking place at the time, through recounts of 2 Yazidi characters and also an ISIS fighter, and of course getting exposed to different experiences. In summary, a growing body of research are actually showing the effectiveness of the realities technologies that I call like augmented reality and virtual reality for cultural heritage presentation and engagement, including how we reconstruct, experience, and interact with past buildings, spaces, people, and events. The key features of AR and VR actually are extending the current reality of past reconstruction and how we are experiencing them, and opening new doors for new imaginations and multisensory experiences. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Rojan. It's exciting to see so many new stimulating ways that we can experience the past. It's really wonderful. And to that end, I'd like to read one of the comments in the chat from Divya, who says, I love the idea of giving equity to various documented historical mental images when talking about visualizations. So it sounds like a really productive way to present different perspectives. And as you said, things that scholars aren't sure about, or there's different interpretations. Let's see here. Okay, there's a question for Mustafa. Do you think that the 3D reconstruction could be used to reproduce completely destroyed areas of the monument that could be integrated into the restoration of the stele? And a follow-up question would be, do you know how much of the stele is missing? Have you been able to get a sense of how much is actually destroyed?
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, the 3D model can be used in the restoration of the stela, specifically the fragment containing the original cuneiform signs by comparing them with the model.
And do you know how much of the stela has been completely destroyed? Were you able to collect kind of all the pieces, or how much is that uncertain?
The destructive about 800% on all of stela.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions for our speakers as we come to the end, or maybe speakers would like to respond to one another in any way? There's a few comments. If you guys would like to unmute yourselves and feel free to speak. There is also another question from Elizabeth Knott. A question for both of the last speakers. I would like to know more about your experiences with using various technologies in terms of accessibility and ease of use. If you could speak to that, please.
Okay, when it comes to accessibility, actually, I have done some research because normally VR is known for providing more immersive experiences, and it's more solo. You could do collaborative, but normally kind of that's where it goes. And it's more expensive to actually maintain and even develop and things like that. But then when it comes to mobile technology, in Iraq, there is a high rate of, smartphone owners. And that's why in particularly in the context of Iraq, we are actually more focusing on mobile phones. It's just in terms of accessibility. And we use mobile phones because people are used to their own mobile phones. They are not using a new devices. So that's also a usability kind of component where you are actually tackling. But then when it comes to the whole designing such experience, these kind of projects are normally interdisciplinary by nature. We are having lots of challenges with sometimes, bringing people to understand even what we are trying to do, just trying to think spatially, because this is not just about thinking about, it's not like a VR, you are thinking all inside the virtual world, or, VR, that's how you think in virtual reality, or a video or animation. No, you are thinking in the real and then virtual world. kind of combining the two together. You have to think about when it comes about developing an exhibition, that's how we approach it. But then we are actually stepping very well in that regard. But then again, with its challenges with understanding, and then with technical kind of people who develop for these platforms is kind of also another challenge. But in my team now, we have developed capacity to do everything in-house, which is kind of something that has changed significantly, because when I returned from Canada, and one of the big challenges how to advance my research area in something that's very new and in fact not many people was understanding, especially that with my architecture background, so many people have and still ask me what I have to do with this kind of works.
Thank you. And Mustafa, can you speak a bit about how you came to use the technology that you're using? Did you try out different technologies, or did you just decide to use this one for a particular reason?
Okay, thank you for the question. My friend's translator with me.
Take your time.
مصطفى، هي تقول انت تقول انت شلون يعني شلون استخدمت التكنولوجيا يعني ببحثك، و يعني ايش تتوقع فائده هاي التكنولوجيا وجودها بالعراق؟ خبرتك باستخدام التكنولوجيا في علم الاثار، وليش استخدمت التكنولوجيا؟
استخدام التكنولوجيا بعلم الاثار جدا يسهل عملنا من خلال توظيف تقنيات الكمبيوتر في مجال عملنا بالآثار، تحديدا برمجيات معالجة الصور والرسم الهندسي. أنا أشتغل على برنامج الفوتوشوب بشكل جيد جدا، وأقوم بمعالجة الصور.
Yeah. He says that using technology is very significant in scientific research, and particularly in archaeology. And he says that he is a professional user of Photoshop and other softwares. So he intends to apply his skills with technology on his scientific research in his MA project.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you have another question?
Let's see here. We have a comment from Yarub Al-Obeidi, who says, I really hope some points from the symposium become shareable with UNESCO for their work on the Al-Nouri Mosque in Mosul. I believe it will be a great opportunity for them to expand their vision about reconstructing the past. All right, are there any other questions for our speakers? If not, I think we'll end it right there. We've already gone over time. My apologies for keeping everyone for so long, but it has been a really stimulating discussion. Thank you all so much for your fantastic talks. Thank you for being here and sharing your work. It was wonderful meeting some of you whom I've never met before, wonderful to see others whom I know. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.